Insight Education started up in 2006, helping students very much like yourselves and students similar to you to get into their dream schools, universities, and careers. We cover all of those areas and go right through from the start to the finish. Thanks, Osman. Now, what makes Insight Education a little bit different is we strongly support social enterprise. What we mean by that is we are there to help you guys, okay? So the start and end of every single one of our processes is about inspiring those 5 values you can see there. To teach you to be independent and succeed in a UK environment, critical thinking and logic, creating you into leaders of tomorrow, building resilience, confidence and determination to achieve your goals, and also helping you to identify what kind of things might be the best subjects for you to think about later down the line. And we do that through something called mentoring rather than tutoring. And we're going to come on to that in a little bit as to what that difference means. Thanks, Osman. So here are some of the schools where we've had success with in the past. Maybe you recognize some of these logos, maybe you don't. By the end, hopefully a lot more of them will be very familiar to you. They range right from the top of the UK sector with schools like Westminster and Eton that have very illustrious, famous and long histories, through to other more countryside-based schools that emphasize extracurriculars and other out of academic sorts of disciplines, like in Battle Abbey School or like in Woldingham School that you can see here. Thanks, Osman. I will now just hand over to Osman. Osman is a former student on our programs who now works for the team here at Insight Education, and he's going to talk to you a little bit more about the methods that we use and also some of his experiences.
Right, thank you, James. So yeah, here at IE, it's beyond just getting the grade. We aim for a deeper learning. We don't just want students to pass their exams, we want them to succeed when they're at their destination too. We develop this by prioritizing 3 key traits and skills. So you can see on the screen, we have critical thinking, emotional intelligence, and independent learning. For this reason, we also give students a personal development mentor who acts as like an elder sibling to help the students' personal development, but also their academic development as well, and helping them in their career and their future goals. IE is unique in that we do not run it as a master-pupil relationship, and we want to encourage student-driven learning. Our approach is grounded in pedagogy, and as you can see on the slide, we have the Philip Race kind of 4-stage cycle of learning. And what we do is we allow students to explore their own passions and dictate the activities they pursue to explore their passion. And the mentor only arrives at the feedback stage. So you have the wanting, doing feedback, the mentor arrives at the feedback stage to refine and modify the plan with the student and help them improve. And the digesting stage is when the student is reflecting on the information and goes back to wanting, completing the cycle as a whole. For me, my own experience of this cycle, it's really helped with the wanting and doing, helping define my passions. And in particular, one document I used was a learning log, which was really important. It helped me record kind of what I read in my spare time, what I watched in my spare time, which was related to my passion. And getting feedback from the mentor helped really crystallize that and make me want to study history at university, which I'm now doing. So for me, it's been a really positive experience. Students on our programs also take part in many other activities like critical thinking classes, presenting and defending their viewpoints in a debating scenario, lots of wider reading and study programs. The images you can see here are taken from our workshops, which would normally be held in person. Sometimes we did host these sometimes we hosted in-person UK study events, but we've always been online from the start, and so we've adapted well to the pandemic, which obviously has meant that we can't host the in-person events as usual. For me, wider reading was really helpful in exploring my passion in studying history at university, and the mentor there helped with the feedback stage and guiding where I spent my spare time exploring that passion. And you can also see kind of academic mentoring featuring in all of our services here, and kind of building on the student's experience. And it didn't matter that it was online for me. I still felt I could build a close relationship with my mentor, who I could share those problems with and have natural conversations with relating to kind of university and school. So I'll now talk about kind of examples of the online services we've run to kind of build on the pedagogy and the Philip Race model. And so we have our online short courses, which teach soft skills not taught by schools. We initially started this over the lockdown period in the UK with the shift online, and now we are seeing a take up largely across an international market. And we think it's really helpful for those wishing to practice EFL in a context rather than just from a grammar book. I'll now hand back over to James.
Thanks so much, Osman. So I want to talk a little bit about what that journey looks like. And then, of course, we're going to zoom right in depth into that boarding school process, start to finish. So it starts with that preparation for boarding schools and working out exactly what we need there. But then these skills are also going to give you a longer term roadmap. So they're going to be the same skills that you need to do well in your GCSEs, A-level, IB. They're those same skills that you then need for university, whether that be in the UK or the US, and then the same skills that you need to transition onto your career. How do we know that? Because these skills have been created by our mentors who have finished that process and then fed back to us on every part they found useful. That program and syllabus has been created for students by students. Thanks so much, Osman. So just to give you a little bit of an example, because I know we have some older students here, we are going to focus mainly on boarding schools. But if you are looking at that longer term roadmap, something like the OSP, which is our Oxbridge Schools program, might be in line for you. And we are hosting webinars on this on the 27th and 30th, which I know that Lucia and Christian will be sending around afterwards. What we do on those programs is to build those skills that we mentioned earlier, like your critical thinking, your emotional intelligence, and we'll come on to what they mean across those periods so that you have those skills and that you can use them in any particular context. So you can see here that that process starts early. It starts right in the final year of IGCSE, although of course you can join at any particular stage. And that's exactly the same as what we use for our boarding schools process. We really do believe what we do works. The top two universities in the UK, I hope fairly uncontroversially to say, are Oxford and Cambridge. And you can see here that in 2018, these methods saw a 49% success rate at interview for Oxford and Cambridge, rising to 51% in 2019. And we've only got half so far, but currently standing at about 53%. So that rate is consistent. And these skills that you will learn through the tuition really do last for a long time. Thanks so much, Osman.
Yep, so just talking through some of our tutors and mentors, the approach we aim to have is to have a mixture of fresh graduates who can act as that elder sibling we discussed, but also senior educational professionals such as examiners, so that students get a variety of perspectives when they are learning and have a experience of a range of different approaches. For me, my mentor was studying at university, so it gave me a good insight as to what life was like there. And as you can see, we've had some really positive feedback from students who have worked with us in the past, highlighting how they've been able to have both academic and personal development, which has helped them their journey through life. I'll now hand back over to James.
Thanks so much. So that's a quick overview of some of the key parts of the IE service. But what I now want to do is talk far more specifically about boarding schools. And to do that, I'm delighted to be joined by Anthony. If we can go to the next slide, Osman. Anthony is head of psychology and careers at a leading independent school, and he's going to talk to you about why you might want to consider applying to a boarding school abroad, specifically in the UK. Over to you, Anthony.
Thank you. Can we have the next slide, please, James? Yeah. First of all, a very warm welcome from England and the UK. And I know that you're super keen because you're missing the presidential inauguration in America right now, which means that you're obviously very keen to develop yourselves as young people. And we really like that here in the UK. We really want committed students, dedicated students that really want to thrive here in the UK. You may or may not know there are over 25,000 universities in the world. That's quite a big number. And the UK, we're very proud to say, has actually 5 universities in the top 20. From Oxford University, as James has mentioned, at number 4, through to Edinburgh University at number 20. So we do compete really well for a relatively small island, for example, if you compare that with the United States. So what is it about this country that really brings out the best in people? Well, there's 5 things here I very briefly want to talk about. First of all, at my school, which is very typical of other boarding schools in the UK, we have outstanding pastoral care. And what that means is, as parents, you will be reassured that if your son and daughter studies here in England or the UK generally, you'll have dedicated staff who will be like a second mother and father to your son or daughter whilst they're here in the UK. So our boarding staff provide outstanding pastoral care. Indeed, we're even inspected on pastoral care as a separate stream from academic development through our independent schools inspectorate. And pastoral care looks after all kinds of your children's needs, from social, emotional, academic, interpersonal, and so on. So literally, your son or daughter will be immersed in a UK environment which doesn't just educate them to high levels for Oxford and Cambridge, but really develops an all-rounded person, a well-rounded person. Moving on to the second point, if you have a look at that diagram which James has provided, there's a little acorn there growing in some soil. And I think that's a really excellent analogy of what boarding schools provide. We provide the soil in which your son or daughter can grow and reach towards the sunshine or the sky. And this accelerated growth of a student is typical in all UK boarding schools. Just for example, you may or may not know that only or less than 10% of schools here in the UK are private or boarding schools. And yet that equates to significantly larger numbers going to the top universities in the Russell Group. So the boarding school model really does work in terms of the percentages of students getting to the top universities. And how we do that at my school and other boarding schools is we offer very small class sizes. So at my school, we only have 8 students per class, even at A level, on average. And we have outstanding teachers, often who have many different degrees up to PhD, and who are experts in pedagogy. You know, that's the science of teaching and learning that James mentioned earlier. So you can be rest assured that if your son or daughter comes to the UK in a boarding school, they can develop friendships from people all over the world. At my small school, for example, of only 400 students, that we have students from over 20 different countries. And that's quite typical of a boarding school here in the UK, so that you get to mix and talk and have conversations with students around the world, which is really good preparation for university. Hopefully my passion for boarding schools and my own subject in psychology is the third reason why it's a really good idea to think about studying in the UK at a boarding school, because we genuinely are passionate about our subjects. So I'm not just sort of saying that I love psychology, but you know, having written 200 articles in psychology over 25 years, and I've just released my 7th book in psychology, I love the subject. And I think if you talk to a historian like James, or if you talk to an information technology specialist, you'll get the same conversation that we love our subjects. And I think being passionate in your subject makes you a better teacher. So it's not just about content, it's about process. And so your son or daughter will be immersed, being able to have some fantastic conversations, often late into the night. I've had conversations with students up to 11 p.m. in my boarding school about, for example, nature versus nurture, the philosophy of mind, explanations of criminal behavior. And in a boarding school, you can have these amazing conversations that you may not be able to have in just a normal day school. Fourthly, the breadth of experiences and opportunities available. Just to pick out one or two, your son or daughter will be able to do the Duke of Edinburgh Gold Award, for example, which universities love to see on your CV. Our school every year sends students to Romania, actually, to an area to help underdeveloped villages in families in poverty to build a home using new technologies. So my students have told me that this experience in Romania is a life-changing experience for them when they get back to the UK. And I can see the change interpersonally in my students when they return from Romania. And they've made friends for life that they still communicate with, the children that they help to look after. It really is genuinely moving. And finally, of course, we have familiarization with the UK language and the British culture if you're considering a UK university. We have EAL courses, which James mentioned, English as a second language. And we have experts on hand in all of our boarding schools to help take your son or daughter, whatever level they are in terms of their English language, and super boost them to the highest language levels possible, which of course is going to be very good when you're applying to the top universities like Oxford and Cambridge. So looking at all those 5 things there, these are the things that we help your children grow. We nourish your son or daughter, we develop your son or daughter, we challenge your son or daughter. It's not always easy. And when your son or daughter is homesick for Romania, there's always somebody on hand to sit down and talk with them, you know, hold their hand and talk through their emotions. Because of course, this is a big decision that your son or daughter has to make. And it's a big decision for you as parents as well. So we're always on hand from first thing in the morning to last thing at night to help guide your son and daughter through the UK boarding school system. Okay, that's all for me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anthony. Osman, if we can move on. So hopefully that convinced you as to why you might want to consider a UK boarding school. So if we've taken you on that journey, I think the next stage is what you should look for when selecting a school. So this was a process I went through myself, and have helped a number of students through successfully as well since that to some of the top schools in the UK. I was fortunate in my school academic career to not drop a grade in exams, and I want to let you into some of the secrets behind how I did that, and also how we went about finding that school that allowed me to do that, because it really is about finding the right school. Thanks, Osman. So I've narrowed it down to 8 reasons, but before I go into these 8, I want to say one very important thing. This decision on selecting a school has to be a process that parent and child go through together. You should sit down and create that criteria for yourself. So these are my pieces of advice on what to discuss, but the actual content within these will vary and slightly change according to who you are and what you want. It has to be that personal decision. And of course, there are great people here to help, like Lucia, Christy and their teams, like our teams here over in the UK as well. So the first thing on this list is academics. Academics are of course important, and they're the thing that often jumps out when you look at selecting a school. But they're not everything. And so what I would say is when I look at academics, what I would look for is a school where the pupil can be in the top half of the class. The reason why I say that is because evidence from all the studies show that being at a school that achieves very highly, but where a pupil, for example, who is not right at the top of that academic slide is up there, if you drop down slightly lower to a middle tier school that still has excellent results, but where you can be in that top half of the class, it can help you achieve exactly more than you would being at that slightly lower level in perhaps a more competitive school in terms of the admissions. So that's one thing, looking for a school where you're the top half of that class. The second thing there is when we get to 16, 17, there are 2 different strands that you might want to go down. They're called the IB, International Baccalaureate, and A levels. Some schools offer both, but most schools will just offer one. And this can be something that's quite important to consider. I'm making some generalizations here, but on the whole, the IB is very general. You must do English, you must do maths, you must do 1 humanity, 1 science, and so on. You'll do 6 subjects as well as some general core components. A levels, on the other hand, allow you to specialize a little bit more. You tend to do 4 dropping to 3 in most cases, or I'm sure Toby will show us a different example if you're right at the top of your academic game in a moment. But most do 4 dropping to 3, and so that allows you to specialize more. So if you know you want to do science already, maybe A levels and picking a school that's top there will be a route to go down. So that's academics. How about the type of school? There are lots of schools, as Anthony said, in the UK, and so I want to talk about some of the things you might want to look for there. There's no right or wrong answers here, but do you want to be a school made up of all boys, all girls, a mixture of boys and girls? Do you want to be attending a school which is what we call highly selective? That means there's a very strong academic focus. You will be doing a fair bit of homework and it will reap benefits. Or do you want to be going to a school that prioritizes extracurriculars, your sport, your music, and your drama alongside those academics. Another thing is on the boarding arrangement. Some schools are full board. That means that you're board for the whole term, going home in the holidays. Some schools have some students who are day and some students who do something called flexi boarding, where they board for some of the time, but not all of the time. So I presume for the majority of you, you'll be looking at full-time boarding most probably, but this is important too, because you want to consider, what about all your friends? Are they going to be there at the weekends, or are they going to be going home for flexi boarding? That's another thing to bear in mind. The third one is traditions. The UK has a very long traditions-based history with its schools, and that's something that you can really invest in and become a part of by going to school in the UK. What do I mean by that? There are a number of schools that still hold chapel in fantastic old buildings. If I give one example, Westminster School, there's a special scholarship at that school, which means when the Queen has a ceremony in Westminster Abbey, you guys are the ones there. And Anthony and I had the pleasure of preparing someone for that kind of scholarship very recently. So there's this whole range of traditions that you can be involved in UK boarding schools. And that's not just extending to those I mentioned there. There's also things like unique sports that are only played by certain schools. There's also things like competitions and cups and trophies that have been donated by famous alumni that you can win. So investing in that tradition is a really great part. I've mentioned a bit about the range of extracurriculars, but this is something where you really need to sit down and think, what do I not only currently do, but what do I want to learn that's new? And I'll break them into three main categories for discussion: sport, music, and drama. Some schools will of course excel in all three, but lots have specialisms more in one direction than another. So if you know that you want to play football 3 or 4 times a week and you want to be in a school where everyone else loves playing football, that's something that you should bear in mind, and that's going to be really important, because there's no point in picking a school that has 2 football pitches and 4 theatres if what you really want to do is be playing football the whole time. There's not many schools that have 4 theatres, but just as a way of example. The next one I want to talk about is alumni and careers opportunities. So UK schools come with a huge variety of alumni from all over the world. And one of the things that will happen is as soon as you join that school, you'll be connected with those people. I mean that in terms of they will come in and offer careers workshops. I remember at my school, one of the top schools when I was there, I had a careers workshop that had 2 top barristers in the UK, as well as 3 partners at top law firms in the UK, just for a law event. So that really gives you an idea of the depth and the opportunities that are available that you really don't get in many other places in the world. The opportunity to speak to these career leaders who will talk to you about those unique sports, those unique traditions that they remember fondly from their time. That's something that's really unique. And of course, careers advice also starts at school in the UK. So rather than being left till university, you will get strong guidance on what kind of things you might want to consider: preparation advice, CVs help, all of these key skills that really help to start that journey early. The next thing I want to talk about is the international mix of students. So this is something that can vary from person to person on what you want. So again, please do discuss it. But some schools have a very high international mix of students. And some schools, they come from certain locations in the world. There's some schools, for example, that have a very high amount of European students, others that have a very high amount of Chinese students, others that have a very high amount of UK students. So do have a look at the kind of makeup and nationality of the people at your school. Do you want one where you're primarily talking with other people from the UK, or do you want a broader, more international mix? And that's something that can help, especially with schools that have more international students coming. You also sometimes get some extra benefits. So if the English level of the pupil is slightly weaker, there are some schools that offer EFL classes when you come over to help you adapt, to help you boost your English to that native level. So the only way you can really find out about them is by searching those individual schools, by speaking to people who know and who have been through that process themselves. And of course, that's also where we can help. Two things further: the head teacher or the headmistress or the headmaster. They really do shape that direction of the school. They're responsible for the journey, the direction. So you want someone who's passionate, who has that long proven track record on developing schools. Of course, almost all of the boarding schools will have this, but it's a case of looking for one that strikes a chord with what you guys want as well. And the best way you can do that is by listening to the speeches that they post. Many of them go up online. There are also in-person open days, and you can really get a feel for which ones have that subtle difference that will more closely align with the pupil. And then accommodation. One of the more amusing questions we often get asked is why at boarding schools where they are quite expensive for a lot of cases, why do you share rooms with 4 people? And there's a deliberate reason for that in the majority of cases, which is it's the opportunity for students to make friends, to socialize, and to be part of that community with other students in that dorm. That's something that's really unique, and you grow to form really close friendship connections with those people that you'll be sharing the room with in a large majority of cases. So the accommodation does vary from school to school, but please don't be put off if you see one that offers individual rooms, one that offers group rooms. There's always a reason behind it, and I would say that it's not something that you should worry about too much when looking at those schools. Of course, the other thing is that most of the time in the school will be in that accommodation on campus. So you might be looking and saying, I want to be close to London. I want to be close to Manchester, a major city in the UK. My advice would be, you can visit them in your holidays out of term time when family come over. But because for the majority of time you will be in that school campus, I would look at the school that's right for you rather than the location that's right for you if you are making a change where you have no explicit preference, for example, a family member in one location. So those are my main considerations to bear in mind, and I'll hand over to Toby now to talk a little bit more about the academics of the school. So how you can go about making that transition and standing out in what is quite a competitive sector. If we can have the next slide, I'll briefly introduce. So Toby is specialized in the sciences, and you can see here, I mentioned how most do 3 A levels. Toby did 5 and got 5 A stars. So his advice really does come like gold dust, and I'll hand you over to him.
Hello, my name's Toby, and I'm going to be approaching, how to approach these admissions process. So the main thing with the admissions process that needs to be considered first, I think, is that it's very idiosyncratic. So what I mean by that is it's not standardized across the whole country. Each school will have their own individual pathway, and it's really important that this pathway is fully understood by the time that people that approach the admissions process, so that the learning can be as targeted as possible, because only so much time working on one thing is time working not on everything else. So efficiency is very important. I just want to highlight this by comparing and contrasting Eton and Westminster at 11 plus. So Eton registration deadline is year 5, whereas Westminster is year 6. Both will then have an ISEB pre-test, proceeding to an interview. However, the interviews are different in each case. The Westminster one has slightly more of an academic bias, but both still have academic components. The majority is also pastoral. And then beyond that, Eton will then make a conditional offer if students or candidates meet the standards. And this will be conditional on them passing, the candidates passing year 8 exams. Whereas the Westminster procedure they will offer an unconditional offer at year 6, and it will just need to be the case that the school says that the candidate has maintained good work ethic throughout the remainder of the time. So different enough for going along the wrong strategy to be disadvantageous, and that's something that a mentor or tutor can very much help with. At 16 plus, again, there are subtle differences. So contrasting Sevenoaks School with Westminster, we have both admit about 80 to 85 students at 6th form. However, Westminster admits 70 girls, So therefore, whereas at Sevenoaks it's a bit more mixed, and the reason Westminster does that is because Westminster only has girls at sixth form, so there's already all the boys coming through from the sort of lower down in the school. Westminster requires a UKI set for international students, whereas Sevenoaks does not require a UKI set, but it is optional. And then because Sevenoaks is an international baccalaureate school, as James mentioned, all students must take the same 4 examinations, which are in English, thinking skills, maths and science, whereas at Westminster, dependent on the A-levels one would choose, will determine which entrance exams they take. So this is just to sort of highlight that the process varies between every school, each one, and in the higher up the schools, the more old-fashioned or old, I should say, sometimes the more idiosyncratic those procedures can be, and a tutor can be very important in helping direct with their experience. So next to talk about is, well, when to start. So this, like many things, depends very much on the candidate. So it depends on their attainment, their work ethic, their stress tolerance. But in general, we tend to recommend at least a year before the start of the admissions process, which would be at least 2 years before the potential entrance to that school. However, regardless of the temperament and the ability and work ethic of the student, we'd recommend normally getting a session in advance, very far in advance, just to give a sort of assessment, because it can always be the case that it's possible to start up later if the candidate's already in a very, very strong position, but you then have that time to be able to sort of ameliorate any potential shortcomings that might be highlighted by an earlier sort of session with a mentor. So definitely starting earlier is better. It also enables essentially a less intense, more sort of less stressful system, whereby it can be a more gradual chugging away for a long period of time, rather than it being a big intense cram at the end. So that helps with stress levels. Also, things to consider are scholarship exams. So any sort of particular strengths one could consider applying for scholarships. These can be for academic, music, drama, art, sport. They can range from normally 10% to 100%. 100% scholarships tend to be what we call bursary scholarships, and these will be means tested. So there will be a sort of a maximum family income below, which must be under the income must be below that level in order for people to qualify. The highest scholarships that are not means tested tend to be 50% or just over, and they can, for example, at Tunbridge School, the Ainsley Scholarship was the top academic scholarship, and that was 50% off. So these are also things to consider. In terms of the actual approach of the approach is going to be obviously targeting towards the different components of the admissions procedure, which normally involve interviews, pre-tests, and examinations potentially. So with interviews, knowing the insight, the knowledge, the insights that the mentors can provide is very useful in terms of enabling students to get used to and familiar with an interview format that is most similar to what they will actually come across. But from our experience, the more a child is used to the interview procedure, the more relaxed they are in the interview, and the more they're able to sort of show their true self rather than have a sort of wall of anxiety getting in the way, and at least at the very start. So different schools have different sort of styles of interviews. All will have a pastoral component, but some schools will have just a pastoral. So it will just be about sort of getting an idea of the personality and temperament of the child, and thinking, will they fit in with the like with, say, a boarding house? Are they potentially disruptive, or and some discussions can take place there. However, some have academic components, and these can be to show a certain threshold of competency in sort of English and maths usually, but also sometimes more sort of stretching questions can be asked. And in this case, we definitely think it's important to practice the scenario, and that's not the same at all as being scripted. Often they're trying to see how one thinks, and it's important to teach almost like a sort of a bottom-up first principles approach to problem solving, because with some of the broader questions, it's possible to give a great answer and never actually arrive at the correct answer if you can show that you logical, systematic sort of like steps from the things that you know that get you in the right direction of the answer without actually arriving at the answer. So so yeah, this is what we wrote. So with interviews, it's about that practicing. Also, some schools provide props, so they might give you something and say, hey, what are your thoughts of this? What's your think? How would you interpret this picture? So again, if this is something that the school does, the knowledge of mentors, and they can help guide it in this direction. And then with the exams, so with examinations, the sort of the standard thing that I always say is that you want to establish a bedrock of knowledge, which is a foundation, and that would be in English, maths, or whichever subjects in 16 plus are being approached. And then once that knowledge base is really firm, you can then start targeting it towards the exam and looking at like exam technique, for example. Like, is it multiple choice? If so, how can you use your answers, if you've got a choice of 4 or a choice of 5, to almost help you answer the question. Words like how to approach a question that says describe versus explain versus suggest, all these words that might be incorporated in questions have slightly different tacts in terms of the in terms of what's expected. And different exams will have different ways of phrasing things and different ways of presenting the information. So it's about, again, familiarity, but then also being able to almost, the exams will by the end become almost like a game. You've got a certain number of criteria and you've got to like tick the boxes, and how good are you at ticking the boxes. It's not just about knowledge, although that needs to be established. So with pre-tests, there's 4 main pre-tests. These are CAT4, UKISET, CEM Select, and ISEB pre-test. These the similarities here is that they tend to have a math component, a verbal and a non-verbal, and maybe an English component. But the precise way those tests are structured varies between whether there's like 4 tests, some have 8 tests, so it's split in even smaller chunks. And again, that practice from early stage, so it becomes very much second nature, can be an advantage. On top of this, some of the pre-tests actually, they have a certain time limit, and the time to read the instructions is included in that time limit. So if you're already very familiar with the paper, you can skip the instructions straight away because the instructions are standard each time, or at least just have a quick glance, and it can enable more time for question answering because you've already seen 100 or so, maybe of these similar instruction front pages. And then year 7 and 8, of course, say with schools such as Eton, you'd have a common entrance or scholarship exams. Scholarships are even more idiosyncratic than the common entrance. And then a 16 plus, again, the subject specific exams, which can sometimes be accompanied with an interview. And with respect to picking the 16 plus subjects, it's important to balance passion with competency. So of course, sometimes they go hand in hand, because sometimes success itself yields a sort of a positive response from the candidate. But a candidate will have to demonstrate good knowledge in the exams to get to the required level, but also in an interview situation, that enthusiasm will have to come across, because the teachers will be thinking, is this candidate teachable? They're not just thinking, do they know lots of things? They're trying to think as well, because the whole point of going to school is that the candidates initially don't know all the things, and the teachers then give them that knowledge. So are they going to be sort of moldable intellectually? So both of those things are important to take into consideration. And so yes, I think that concludes What I was going to talk about. One other thing I was going to say is that, of course, with the experience of tutors and mentors, because they'll see so many candidates, and it's their job to specialize in these entrance examinations. They can often have, first of all, resources, all of loads of past papers in history, historic past papers, obviously, which aren't necessarily readily available. Also, if they're very familiar with the content, they can actually make their own past papers to be an additional resource, enabling the actual past papers to be used later in the day, right before the exam time. And so they're not used up 6 months in advance and then there's no more resources. So it can be useful in that way as well. And now I'm definitely finished. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks for listening. I hope what I said was clear. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Toby. I think we can come off the screen share now, so that's okay, Osman. So what we'd like to do next is open this up to you guys as both students and as parents. So if you have any questions, please do feel free to raise your hand on Zoom or to write something in the chat and we can answer any questions there. If you have a question for a specific person, such as myself, Anthony, Toby, or Osman, do write our name in the question. If you have one more generally, we can assign it. But thank you so much to everyone for attending today. We very much hope that we'll be seeing you, some of you again in the very near future. So thank you so much and wishing everyone a lovely evening.